Today, I want to dig down to the nitty gritty on the issue of identity because it has increasingly become this huge thing, and I'm not seeing anybody on the mainstream right see it for what it is. Over time, we've seen people start to identify themselves not as a traditional individual, but rather as part of a bigger social group through which all events must be viewed through. Your job, your net worth, your family tree, even down to every interaction you have, is all viewed as how the larger group is treated by society. And one can't help but notice that all these groups share a glaring common denominator. They're victim groups, and it doesn't matter how big or small or actually privileged these groups are in reality. They are all framed as victim groups who were historically oppressed and are currently being oppressed right now. Feminists are part of the victim group women, who are half of the entire population. That's how ridiculous this can get. Now, there has to be a reason for all this. There has to be a reason. There has to be some incentive for doing this. Maybe the civil rights movement has something to do with it. People realized there was power in identifying as a victim group. As Shelby Steele says, white guilt equals black power. And the powers that be realize that there's more power to be had in creating these groups and then pandering to them in a way that will guarantee support. But I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. A book that is required reading, in my opinion, is Eric Hoffer's The True Believer. It is an irreplaceable resource, and I'll be quoting it a lot in this video. But just to backtrack a bit, for anyone not familiar with the book or what it's about, the book provides the blueprint for how mass movements start and maintain themselves, as well as the psychology behind why people join these movements in the first place. So let's take a look at what he says. A mass movement attracts and holds its following not because it can satisfy the desire for self-advancement, but because it can satisfy the passion for self-renunciation. People who see their lives as irredeemably spoiled cannot find a worthwhile purpose in self-advancement. The prospect of an individual career cannot stir them to a mighty effort, nor can it evoke in them faith and a single-minded dedication. They look on self-interest as in something tainted and evil, something unclean and unlucky. Anything undertaken under the auspices of the self seems to them foredoomed. Nothing that has its roots and reasons in the self can be good and noble. Their innermost craving is for a new life, a rebirth, or, failing this, a chance to acquire new elements of pride, confidence, hope, a sense of purpose and worth by an identification with a holy cause. An active mass movement offers them opportunities for both. If they join the movement as full converts, they are reborn to a new life in its close-knit collective body, or, if attracted as sympathizers, they'll find elements of pride, confidence, and purpose by identifying themselves with the efforts, achievements, and prospects of the movement. I'll just insert here a moment to say an example of this would be the A in the LGBTQIA community, the ally, the sympathizer, one of the good straight people who's on the side of the gay rights movement. You ever notice how almost every fruit fly is always a woman? George Orwell calls women the swallower of slogans. They fall for this propaganda more easily. Anyways, misogynistic rant over. Let's carry on. To the frustrated, a mass movement offers substitutes either for the whole self or for the elements which make life bearable, and which they cannot evoke out of their individual resources. The reason that inferior elements of a nation can exert a marked influence on its course is that they are wholly without reverence towards the present. They see their life and the present as spoiled beyond remedy, and they are ready to waste and wreck both. Hence their recklessness and their will to chaos and anarchy. They also crave to dissolve their spoiled and meaningless selves in some soul-stirring, spectacular communal undertaking, hence their proclivity for united action. Thus, they are among the early recruits of revolutions, mass migrations, and of religious, racial, and chauvinist movements, and they imprint their mark upon these upheavals and movements which shape a nation's character and history. Though the disaffected are found in all walks of life, they are most frequent in the following categories: the poor, misfits, outcasts, minorities, adolescent youth, the ambitious, whether facing insurmountable obstacles or unlimited opportunities, and those in the grip of some vice or obsession, the impotent, the inordinately selfish, the bored, the sinners. What does that group sound like to you? The entire Democrat voting base, right? They've worked hard to cultivate these populations over time because they can continue to pander to them with amazing success. And guess what? If you're a member of one of these groups and you leave the cult of leftism, how are you treated? Like a heretic, right? These groups claim to be about individuality, expression of the self, and tolerance of other people, but ask any conservative minority how they're treated. These groups are specifically designed and invented to be Democrat voting blocs. That's their true purpose. That's why if you stray away from being a leftist, you're immediately excommunicated from the group and ostracized. That's why the Democrats work so hard to pander to these people. That's why their narrative will always have these people framed as victim groups. That's why Candace Owens says black people are still on the Democrat mental plantation. Eric Hoffer goes on to say, those who see their lives as spoiled and wasted crave equality and fraternity more than they do freedom. If they clamor for freedom, it is but freedom to establish equality and uniformity. The passion for equality is partly a passion for anonymity, to be one thread among many which make up a tunic, one thread not distinguishable from the others. No one can then point us out, measure us against others, and expose our inferiority. They who clamor loudest for freedom are often the ones least likely to be happy in a free society. The frustrated, oppressed by their shortcomings, blame their failure on existing restraints. Actually, their innermost desires for an end to the free-for-all. They want to eliminate free competition and the ruthless testing to which the individual is continually subjected in a free society. One of the most important distinctions between the shift from individualism to a collectivist viewpoint is that the individual really doesn't exist anymore. You're a manifestation of the larger group and nothing else. Here's what Eric Hoffer says about that. A rising mass movement attracts and holds a following not by its doctrine and promises, but by the refuge it offers from the anxieties, barrenness, and meaninglessness of an individual existence. It cures the poignantly frustrated by not conferring on them an absolute truth, or by remedying the difficulties and abuses which make their lives miserable, but by freeing them from their ineffectual selves. And it does this by enfolding them and absorbing them into a closely knit and exultant corporate whole. To ripen a person for self-sacrifice, he must be stripped of his individual identity and distinctness. He must cease to be George, Hans, Ivan, or Tadao, a human atom with an existence bounded by birth and death. The most drastic way to achieve this is by the complete assimilation of the individual into a collective body. The fully assimilated individual does not see himself and others as human beings. When asked who he is, his automatic response is that he is a German, a Russian, a Japanese, a Christian, a Muslim, a member of a certain tribe or family. He has no purpose, worth, and destiny apart from his collective body, and as long as that body lives, he cannot really die. The effacement of individual separateness must be thorough. In every act, however trivial, the individual must by some ritual associate himself with the congregation, the tribe, the party, etc. His joys and sorrows, his pride and confidence must spring from the fortunes and capacities of the group rather than from his individual prospects and abilities. There is no better example of this principle than the George Floyd case. Remember, there are no individuals in critical race theory. There's only groups of people wherein each person can only be a representative of the broader group's identity. Therefore, there are no people named Derek Chauvin or George Floyd. They don't have histories. They don't have families. They don't know each other outside of this one interaction. Their motives are already pre-planned and pre-approved. For all intents and purposes, they're not people. They're just skin color and meat, objects used to tell a story. The white oppressor kills a black victim. The end. No nuance, no more thinking, no more questions, no extra videos of Floyd complaining about his breathing when he was standing up and sitting down, no autopsy reports, no drug tests, no testimony from his drug dealer who was in the car with him, no prior history of him shoveling pills in his mouth while being arrested, no criminal history. Nothing about how Derek and George actually worked with each other recently. Nothing about how Derek Chauvin weighed 155 pounds and Floyd was 6'4", 240. Not even asking the question, does being restrained like that have the potential to even kill somebody? No individual fact can change the collective narrative. This wasn't about George Floyd and his resisting arrest while overdosing on fentanyl. It's about his sacrifice to the narrative. This is all about black people who've resisted arrest in the past and met similar fates. Hell, it's not even that specific. It's more like if anything bad happens to a black person, regardless of the circumstances, it's because of racism. And to deny that ridiculous argument will make you a racist. Maxine Waters traveled to Minnesota from California just to say, we're looking for a guilty verdict. We're looking for a guilty verdict, and we're looking to see if all the talk that took place and has been taking place after they saw what happened to George Floyd, if nothing does not happen, then we know that we've got to not only stay in the street, but we've got to fight for justice. But I'm very hopeful, and I hope that we're going to get a verdict that says guilty, 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 and if we don't, we cannot go away. A reporter asked her, and not just manslaughter, right? Oh no, not manslaughter. No, no, no. This is guilty for murder. I don't know whether it's in the first degree, but as far as I'm concerned, it's first degree murder. You see, the motives were preordained for both people as far as identity politics are concerned. Chauvin wasn't even charged with first degree murder, but in their propaganda, Chauvin was out there looking specifically to kill Floyd. And poor Floyd was just out there trying to spend counterfeit bills like the sweet, innocent angel he was. But the Democrats actually go further than this. They say that he sacrificed his life for the cause. This is where the movement shares religious overtones, which Eric Hoffer actually notes is common among mass movements. And black intellectuals like Coleman Hughes and John McWhorter have pointed out that this is a factor in Black Lives Matter's popularity. Here's Nancy Pelosi. Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice, for being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? Call out for your mom. I can't breathe. But because of you, and because of thousands, millions of people around the world who came out for justice, your name will always be synonymous with justice. So not only was Derek Chauvin out there looking for Floyd, but Floyd was out there ready and willing to be a sacrifice for justice, a saint, a martyr. Let us quote from the book of George 3:16. For George so loved his freedom that he swallowed his only begotten fentanyl, that whosoever should believe in the mainstream narrative should not have their businesses burned or be called a racist, but to have an everlasting Twitter account that won't be deleted. And this logic is applied to every other group that the Democrats have made. Every member of a group is a saint, a Christ figure. They're always presented as flawless, sinless, without fault in any given situation. You can even be in the middle of stabbing someone to death, as was the case of Micaiah Bryant, and you will still maintain saint status. Every group has an oppressor as well, a devil character, a demon, the embodiment of evil. Every oppressor has their original sin, slavery, racism, colonialism, etc. And every sinner can be made whole by acknowledging their sins and repenting at the voting booth. And like religion, none of it is actually real, like Ephesians 6:12 says, For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. There's hardly ever any actual racism. It's all make-believe. It's in the ether. It's systemic. It's everywhere and nowhere, all at the same time. This is the point of identity politics. It's basically Marxism. It's the bourgeoisie standing up for the proletariat, even though the definition of both becomes more and more loose. None of it makes any sense except for the fact that it gives Democrats power by accepting more and more people into its victim groups and creating more and more guilt for the oppressors. This is how they've managed to politicize every last part of life. Since every identity group is basically make-believe, anyone can join. I can't remember exactly how Jordan Peterson said it, but you can separate your existence across multiple layers and groups, at least 5 or more. And in at least one of those groups, you'll find that you're actually the oppressor, the victimizer. Now, identity politics does the inverse of this. You scan the multiple layers and groups of your life, you find the weakest one, the victim, and identify as that one. You can be a black NBA player who's more successful than 99.9% of people and still identify as a victim. Whether you're actually a victim or not is irrelevant. As long as you share some characteristics of people who were victims at one point, you can claim victim status. And if you don't fall into a victim group, don't worry, because they're literally inventing new ones all the time. Your victim group can even become loved and celebrated and given special treatment by all of society, and still retain your victim status. This is why people like Obama or Colin Kaepernick identify as the black side of their family, because that's where the power lies in our society. This is why newer generations are increasingly choosing to identify as something in the LGBT spectrum, because people choose the path of least resistance, and victim groups offer that route. This is why if a teenager starts to identify as transgender, almost any medical specialist they are bound to see is one that will be affirming of their supposed identity. And why wouldn't you be? If conservatism was smart enough to invent a made-up condition that after 6 months of having it, you'd almost be guaranteed to be a radical conservative, why would you turn those people away or convince them that they were actually something else instead? 60 Minutes just released a report on people who detransitioned, and it's mind-blowing how easy people are initiated into it. They feature a 20-year-old who started on cross-sex hormones after just 2 appointments. And 3 months after that, he had his testicles removed. Then, 1 week after having breast augmentation surgery, immediately had regret and wanted to kill himself, and wonders how he'll ever feel normal again. One mistake that conservatives have made is that they have relentlessly mocked the idea that anyone can identify as anything. But this denies the obvious reality around us, that if society collectively decides to cooperate with those delusions, then, in effect, people actually can identify as anything they want to. My entire generation and the generations after have been raised to believe that they were special and that you can be anything you want to be in life. And clearly that was a lie and turned out to not be true at all. But identifying, aka pretending or LARPing as something other than what you are, is actually possible. And the elites have worked really hard to ensure that it's possible for their own political gains. The entire mission is to remove any stigma from the absurdness of it all, and put that stigma on you if you happen to disagree with it. And this brings me to the end. The sadness of this whole thing is coming to the realization that if the government and activists really tried, given enough time, they really could convince people of almost anything. Decades ago, homosexuality had the same connotations as bestiality, incest, pedophilia, but through social engineering and purposeful desensitizing exposure, the American public has completely accepted it as fine. And there's little campaigns here and there that try to normalize those other forms of degeneracy as well. And while they haven't gotten anywhere yet, it seems hard to believe that some version of them won't be accepted over the next 40 years, if America continues to just swallow up every bit of propaganda that's thrown at them. Right now, the vanguard seems to be on the transgender front. If the left can convince the majority of people on the validity of that concept, then let's be real, there's nothing they won't be able to convince people of. COVID exposed just how out of it and willing to go along with the lies the American public actually is, so I have no doubt the left will eventually succeed, if something drastic doesn't happen in the meantime. Think of how long the gays fought to be in the position they are now. For decades. And we're only 4 or 5 years into this transgender stuff saturating the information space. Do you really think you'll be able to keep up the same level of hesitancy about this stuff for the next 30 years? Do you think the next generation of kids will have the level of hesitancy and wherewithal to resist this stuff and the 100% positive messaging around it? I seriously doubt it. But it is a problem, and I don't see it going away anytime soon. It feeds into people's narcissism too much. It plays into the hands of politicians too much. The algorithms will continue to create more and more echo chambers with this stuff built into it, and even the ideology itself is a self-fulfilling prophecy. And even if we were to change course right now and focus on educating people, which, let's face it, is never going to happen, we'd still have generations of people who still believe it and fight for it. And it's going to continue to be around for the rest of our lifetimes. That's all I've got for today. If you like this video and type of content, give this video a like and consider subscribing. I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.